where am I lacking confidence? Where am I struggling with relationships? You're in your most powerful state when you can be alone with your thoughts. We lean so heavily on the external elements, on the materialistic things, on things that do involve money and possessions. And it's at the end of the day, it's like money can't buy happiness. It can buy happiness, but it doesn't buy joy.
Before we get into detail, I want to kind of open up with a bit of a study that was brought into life in 2019 in England. It was a study around professional footballers, which are professional soccer players,
Right.
which looked at the health of ex-footballers after the ages of 65. And the University of East Anglia mentioned, they monitored 75 former elite professional footballers, and they looked at their cognitive health. And there was massive emphasis on more need within that cognitive area to support people coming out of the exit strategies that they might have anticipated within their career. And there was big emphasis, like I said, on research and assessment within aftercare and afterlife. So from that study, Jeff, what are your thoughts on that, and why do you think there was an issue in terms of retirement within sport?
Well, my big thoughts, and again, thanks for having me on the show. This is a true pleasure and an honor to be here to speak with you today. But my thoughts, honestly, around it, and the reason why it's so important is that, from a very early age, for many people who go into sports, male or female, they start playing around 4 years old. I know I started when I was 4, and they go and they play, and depending on the sport, obviously, and the impact on the body. And also on the mind, just depending on the sport. You can go anywhere up to, some people end at age 18, 19, if you're a gymnast, all the way up to, people that play 40s, 50s, 60s if they're in golf or whatever. But in relation to whether it be pro footballers in soccer or any other sport, it's such an impact because their identity from that starts to form at that early age of, childhood, adolescence, and they feel that is who they are, and yet don't really quite understand who they truly are at their core. And mentally, when you leave, there's this huge separation and void of just who that person was versus who this new person is. And they don't really understand exactly what it is deep down internally, exactly what they represent. So they have a hard time separating. And that's why I think the mental shift, and there is such a mental issues around players that leave after sports and what life is like after they retire or get injured or just quit.
So how did that journey start for you? How did it interest you, this area? Did you have past experiences? Were you exposed to these areas and it kind of influenced you to proceed within the area?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I'll try to make this as succinct as possible, but I got into the coaching space roughly 2 years ago and really started out like more in the mental health arena, like looking at things from mindset. I'd just gotten off of this big, they have this thing called the Movember movement in November, and it was 2020, November 2020, and I was just thinking, I'm like, yeah, I would love to be able to be a support for other men in some way, shape, or form. But then it just kind of gravitated into leadership coaching. And then after doing that for about a year, just because I've been in leadership and business most of my life, I realized like something wasn't aligned. And having been a former athlete myself, never made professional or anything, but just playing baseball, and had 4 scholarship offers. And I turned every single one of them down coming out of high school and just quit. Like it was my whole family was kind of at a loss. But what I didn't realize was that I was, stubborn, young, thinking I was on top of the world. I could do whatever I wanted. And for some reason, I just quit. And I just said to myself at that point, you can make whatever you want out of yourself. But I was still lost because that was my identity. And so I kind of went into leadership after having really bad experience with my actual baseball coach. Was the whole reason why I went into leadership, which is really interesting kind of turn of events. And how my world shaped, because I didn't want anybody to go through what I went through. So I was like, I'm going to guide and lead people in the best possible direction so they can have a really strong, powerful leader and someone who leads them and leads by example. So that kind of shaped that. But for me to get into the coaching of former athletes, I went through a lot of deep internal work and a lot of breath work, and huge on breath work. And it's part of the thing that I actually share with with former athletes is going through breathwork sessions to help uncover things that deeper seated pieces of like our traumas or things that were things shaped our life, and going back and reliving those things and then uncovering it and telling yourself and realizing I can move forward now because I've let certain things go. And what I saw myself actually in August during a breathwork session speaking to former athletes and realizing that there's such a need, that I needed that when I was young and I didn't have it. So now knowing that there's so many people I've already talked to and also worked with at this point just have expressed the same thing. They're like, this is such a powerful need because it is such a loss of identity and purpose. And that's what led me to getting into Athletes Afterlife and really helping cultivate a community. Is the main thing is really want to create a community and create a generate energy for people to realize that, hey, you are so much more than the number or the name on your jersey. You're actually who you are is what is deep down inside you. And that's what created you an athlete. It was that person here. It's the same person that's going to create success for you after being an athlete.
You mentioned breath work. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because again, you said prior to your role now that it was something that you didn't really understand or something that you didn't really practice. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that is and why that's relevant today?
Yeah, so there's different varieties of breath work that you can do, but and from a very granular level, one of the things that you can always do just on your own if you're an individual is there's different methods like people do on their own, like Wim Hof method breathing. There's also box breathing. It's really very powerful. I learned about that years ago in relation to Navy SEALs. It's something that they do a lot just to calm themselves down in a very intense moment. But the type of breath work I'm really referencing right now is guided breathwork sessions, guided by somebody who's facilitating the actual breath work. Usually it's in a group of people. It's not usually by yourself, but it's anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes on average. And they go through different sessions and they guide you through different pieces. And what happens is in the back of the brain, there's this thing called the pineal gland. And once you go through this into this rhythmic breathing, and it's usually intense breathing, you get to the point where your mouth feels like it's like cotton mouth. It's very dry a lot of times. And you feel like you want to quit, but you just keep going through it. And it releases DMT, which DMT almost creates a hallucinogenic state to where you start to see things and things start to unfold in front of you and basically tells a story in essence. And in that story, you a lot of times uncover pieces of yourself that maybe you didn't realize were holding you back in life, or things that sometimes it's a very beautiful state. Sometimes it's not emotional, but in these things, you uncover certain ways forward, like dealing with the past and allowing that to be, and then being able to move forward after the fact. And it's been very impactful for me this past year. Like I can't begin to even imagine like what my life would be like if I hadn't done it. So knowing the impact that it's had on me, it's one of the reasons why I really want to bring this to former athletes, because it helps let go of specific things in your life that you don't even realize you might be holding on to.
And what does that practice look like, Jeff? Is it a community or is it individualized? How does that work?
So, I mean, you can do it individual. It's really most of the time when I've done them, I've done a couple over like a Zoom call, it's a different experience. But at the end of the day, the big thing is you need to go into any kind of breath work with intention. Now, a lot of times I think the largest I was at was recently I went to an event that had 500 or 600 people in it. And you have 500 or 600 people all going into this rhythmic breathing. And the thing is when you have that much energy in a room, like a lot of people will be like screaming and crying and yelling. And this is all like in a dream state, and you're feeling and you're picking up on all these energies. That it all kind of depends on the level of what people are willing to dive into and to go into for themselves. And I just tell people that some people don't want to feel a really deep experience, so they just go into it a little half-heartedly and you just have more of a peaceful experience, which is fine. But I feel like the best way is like to get the most bang for the situation is just go in with a very clear intention. Maybe it's like, I really want to understand more about abundance. Like, where is abundance blocking me? Or where am I lacking confidence? Where am I struggling with relationships? Where am I struggling with my business? And you just have a very clear intention on focus and clarity of certain things. And then usually as you have that focus, the breath work starts to show something to you. And that thing that pops up is something that is usually something you need to address internally or that you haven't addressed internally. And then it kind of comes to fruition. But it usually there's community aspects. That's how I'm going to do most of mine, is probably guided through Zoom calls, since everything's in a virtual thing anyway. Eventually, as we continue to grow, we'd love to have retreats to where we can do them in the physical form and have people come and show up for different things like that. But yeah, that's kind of the direction that we're taking this, and try to help people out. Like I said, you can do it individually if you really want to. I feel that when you're in an arena with other people doing it too, you would think that you might feel a little bit more reserved and not want to like open up, but most people feel more comfortable they're like, I'm not the only one doing this, so I'm going to allow myself to completely open up. And then your experience becomes that much more heightened.
So how does one person unveil the identity element of who they are? So you obviously in your case you work with ex-professionals in certain sports. How does one kind of dissect down their identity and maybe remove those attachments that they might have had and are now going into a new area of their life where they have to kind of remove attachment and remove feeling and emotion around a certain past that they've had? How does that process begin in your eyes?
There's a lot of different methods. I know, me personally, one of the things that I like to utilize for anybody that I work with it's a process called ikigai, and it's a Japanese terminology that's essentially means purpose. And basically what that does is it breaks down into 4 different quadrants of things. It comes down to like, what are you good at? What can generate revenue for you? What does the world need? And it breaks things down into this thing. And when you start to piece things in each of the 4 quadrants, and you start breaking it into like what actually could create like a need for you in your life, or something that you feel you could actually move into, it kind of helps people break down and understand what could be a really great purpose for them, like the things that they're actually motivates them and fuels them in life. And then that allows them to kind of lean into like the next best version of like themselves for a career. So they're not just falling into a career that is chosen for them, where it's not it's their plan, not somebody else's plan. And they're not, it's not to say that everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, and more means like go into a path of, you're not just falling into something because you didn't go into, retiring after sports and you didn't go into it with no plan. And now you're just working, I would just say, as like a life insurance agent, when that wasn't even what you really wanted to do. So Ikigai is definitely one of the big things that I try to focus on with people. And then, just through personality assessments, and then really just uncovering strengths. I think strength finders are huge for me as well. And also knowing that people's weaknesses. I think sometimes we focus too heavily on strengths, and recognizing that we need to be understanding of where we are weak, and knowing that those key elements are where we can actually seek, help from somebody else, instead of not always feeling like we have to do it ourselves, because that can be a really big drain on an individual if they're always trying to do something that they're not necessarily good at.
So what would a weakness look like, Jeff? Is it distraction? Is it substances? Is it factors externally that might impact someone's mentality towards the outcome? I'm intrigued what a weakness might look like in your practice.
So, a weakness could be something very much more along an external factor like that. Maybe it's a substance, or it could be something that is like, are you easily distracted by social media? So like, what does that look like for you? Or it could be something, as long as if you're trying to build a business, like what are the things that you're good at, and what's your zone of genius versus what's not your zone of genius. So I know, just taking it from my direction, my zone of genius is in working with people and helping people out, get from one level to the next level to have the best life possible, for not just for themselves, but for their family, and to live in complete joy and happiness. However, the tech side of things for me is not, that's a weakness for me. Like, I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world. I get better each and every day, but so stuff, recognizing like, where are you spending a lot of time doing something that isn't necessarily something you're passionate about, that the part that you are passionate about and what you are trying to do as your purpose, it kind of is a bit of a drain on your energy, and trying to figure out, okay, so if I don't enjoy this part of it, but I enjoy the overarching part of it, what can I do to try to incorporate somebody else to maybe do this work for me, find, and it's about understanding certain things that you are good at versus what you're not good at, and understanding like you can maybe outsource those things. And that's understanding specific weaknesses around business specifically, but also just knowing yourself. I guess from an internal weakness, it could be anything from, if you have an addictive personality or something like that, and recognizing like, where can I, once you recognize that and you own the weakness and you dive into that darkness, you can say to yourself, now I can address it accordingly, and I can seek help in some way, shape, or form. I would say probably one of the best examples of that, not an athlete, but the guy from Wolf of Wall Street, he talks about how of addictive of a personality he is. And he doesn't even allow him, now that he recognizes it, he doesn't even allow himself to go and like do specific things, because he knows that it'll just create a downward spiral effect on his life. So it's just understanding and being in full ownership of that, and saying, this is something that will impact me on a negative way, and this is what I need help with, and always surrounding yourself with the right resources to be able to move forward in the right direction.
You gave the example of addictive personality and understanding that you might have that. Currently in the UK, and it might be different in America, 1 in 8 are on a waiting list to get support in terms of mental health. Now, my question to you is, how does one understand that they might have certain traits or certain things in terms of maybe their makeup, their personality, that needs to be rewired? How can we, maybe with a limited amount of resources, or maybe a limited amount of tools, to really get to understand ourselves and and be more aware of ourselves, what can we do to maybe pick up on those traits that might be useful for us in terms of career transition, or maybe, those that might not be in sport, they might want to just find a little bit more about themselves in terms of professional development. If you got any tips or tricks around that?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned resources. It's always what I've found in life, especially when I've hit points where I feel like I've done everything. We always tell ourselves we've done everything, and yet there's so many more things that we could possibly do. So it's not always a lack of like resources, but more of our lack of resourcefulness with what we actually have, and in what we can actually utilize. So some tips and tricks around that is, you mentioned also awareness. And the thing about awareness is, we're only aware to the level of what we're allowing ourselves to be aware. And our awareness is so key. And as soon as we start to understand certain things and the awareness around certain things, then that's when we need to really just lean into that and say, okay, why is that? So it's kind of like, for me, one of the big things is triggers. So this is a great thing for addiction related stuff, for anybody who is dealing with mental health issues, is leaning into your triggers. Like when you say you're driving and somebody cuts you off, and your immediate reaction is to get pissed and cuss the guy out. At that given moment, it's hard to control your first response, but then after that, step back and say, why does that trigger me? What is the deeper meaning behind that? And really kind of diving into any individual trigger, because a trigger is a weakness, and a trigger sometimes is something that can fall into an addictive type personality of falling into something. Why do we lean in? Like whenever we're upset, why do we eat ice cream? Or, maybe it's like we dive into sweets, or why do we immediately go hit the bottle whenever we feel down about something or something doesn't go our way? What is that trigger? Why is it that we rely on that substance to create some sort of dopamine hit inside of us, which gives us an immediate sense of gratification to say it's okay? And yet all it does is just send us back down into a deeper spiral, and we become dependent on something. So I would say for anybody that is on a waiting list. Obviously, there's a lot of resources out there. The internet is amazing, and don't just because of our world being so virtual, don't just subject yourself to saying I need to speak with somebody in person. So much of what we're doing is virtual. Like my therapist that I even talk to, because I feel like we should all have somebody as a third unbiased third party that you can speak to. Everything I do is virtual. And it's just because you're still able to connect, just like how we are on a Zoom call right now. But it's just, and you're still be able to open up and uncover all the things that you need to. You don't need to be in the physical space. So if you're on a waiting list, try to be open to yourself to say, I can do this on a virtual setting, in a Zoom setting or Google Meets or whatever. There's so many different ways to do it. Heck, I've even had calls with people that are in the UK that just through WhatsApp, because they didn't even have a Zoom account. So, you can do all sorts of different things. So it's just about being more resourceful and then really leaning into your triggers for sure.
What about environment, Because obviously you mentioned triggers, but I'm sure there's a famous saying that you're a product of your own environment. And what that means is that you might get put into situations where you might behave down to the people that you surround yourself with, or those triggers might be apparent because of the activities, etc., that people do with the friendship groups they have, and especially with men. And we think about masculinity and what it means to do certain things, and that might have an impact on, you mentioned the would term them instant gratification activities. So have you looked at anything around environment? I'm just intrigued to kind of think about maybe your practices. If, say, for instance, if someone is drinking too much alcohol or doing other things in terms of maybe substances that are related to the people that they put themselves around, what's the process there? Have you ever come across situations like that where people have opened up around how we could maybe resolve that issue and kind of support that?
Yeah, environment's huge. It's absolutely, it's so impactful on a human being. I mean, you just think about, as a child growing up, you don't really have a choice per se, right? Up until, unless you decide to just leave the house when you become a teenager or whatever, but you don't really have a choice in your environment. What happens thereafter is our choice. The problem is a lot of times is we only know what we're comfortable with, and what sometimes we perceive as home or comfort is actually the thing that's worst for us. But that's something that you're familiar with. You stay in the familiar, and you really need to lean into the unfamiliar. If the familiar is not feeding you in a positive way, like you said, what you become a product of your environment, you become the sum of the 5 people you hang out with most. All of those things are environmental based, and those are choices that we need to make. And a lot of times we subject ourselves to hold back that choice. So like you have someone you've been friends with ever since you were like 6 years old, and now you're 24 and you're just not aligned with this person at all. They've gone this way, you've gone that way, but you continue to hold on. That's like a product of your environment, to where it's not feeding you in the right way. And it doesn't mean you have to eliminate someone from your life, but just start making the choices to put yourself in an environment that feeds you a little bit better, to where you just don't have as much time to be with an individual. I don't believe in removing people from your life. I just believe in getting so focused on your own personal development, your own process, to where you start surrounding yourself with people and in an environment that's actually good for yourself. It's one of the reasons why I moved to Austin, Texas. I moved from Florida to Austin because Austin was such a high energy and high frequency community that it really fed my soul and where I needed to go, and a sense of belonging and understanding in a different way than I had ever experienced. Whereas Florida wasn't really doing that for me anymore. And so it's environment is so huge. It's just, the thing is, again, it comes back down to your own awareness. It comes back down to seeing something and seeing patterns in your life and stopping and recognizing, because we can never move forward just based off of somebody else forcing us to do something. It's kind of like if you're like in a relationship and the relationship isn't healthy, and you're going through, constant ups and down swings. Like there's good moments, and then there's really bad moments, and there's good moments and bad moments. And it's just this back and forth. If you were to come to me and say, "Hey, Jeff, like, I don't think that your relationship is healthy, and I think you need to get out of it. Most of us won't listen, because that's like you subjecting your own opinion. The person has to really do the work themselves and say, I know this isn't healthy for me. I know it's scary for me to leave. I know I don't want to be alone, but I need to get out of this because it's not feeding me, and it's not where it's impeding on my progress, not just personally, but professionally. So it's really the awareness and just leaning into that uncomfortable, knowing that that uncomfort is on the other side is going to be the most beautiful existence we could possibly have.
You mentioned leaving and becoming alone. Do you think that's the problem there, in terms of people
Ooh,
are fearful of being alone, and they feel that they cannot maybe replace what they had previously into maybe the future that they hold?
absolutely. I think we, especially now with social media, right? Because there's so much easily at our disposal, at just like anytime we want something, it's immediate gratification. That being alone, and also being as a former athlete, even if you play in a sport where it's like you're a golfer or a tennis player, or something that's very individualized, you're still always around people of the same energy, same dynamic. And so you're always around team, you're always around others. And whether that's in a personal relationship or in a professional relationship where you're part of a team or in that kind of environment, as soon as there is that, there's a lot of fear around being alone. There's a lot of fear around stepping away. And once you are alone, so many of us, because we're not designed, we're communal beings by nature. We're afraid to be alone with our thoughts. So we continuously force ourselves to stay into something longer than we should, because we're afraid to be alone with our thoughts. And the thing is, you're in your most powerful state when you can be alone with your thoughts, and yet you move past that, and you move into a state of just peace and joy when you can be comfortable being alone. I always tell people, as soon as you go through a breakup, or as soon as you go into a situation where when you're not with a team, or you're not with someone and you are by yourself, force yourself to literally go out and take yourself out on dates by yourself. Just do it, because it's one of those things where it's super uncomfortable. It makes people like just want to just crawl into bed and just, pull the sheets over their eyes and just not even move. But if you can get comfortable with being alone in situations like that, you become an extremely powerful individual, because then you're going to bring your best self, because you're allowed to sit with your thoughts and understand who you are. And you can come forward to the next team environment or the next group setting, or when you're not alone with people, and bring your best self forward and understand who you are and what you represent. And so you're not afraid of that environment, being alone anymore. And you can actually bring more to the table to other people that will see that side of you, and you'll encourage others by being able to step into your own discomfort. You'll encourage others to do the same, and it'll actually start to have a good ripple effect of having people being able to lean into that discomfort a little bit more for themselves.
Would you say dropping ego is an element within that? Because people
Ooh.
kind of see themselves, people, especially athletes, they might have a status or persona about themselves. And
Mm,
then when they're trying to remove themselves from what you've mentioned into maybe a new limelight, ego still has an impact on that. They probably think, I'm too good for this, I'm better than this, I was this. And that becomes
mm.
an overriding factor as well, in terms of dropping ego to change identity and change your path going forward, if that makes sense. Have you come across anything within that?
Oh, 100%. Ego isn't always all bad. I went through a phase where I thought ego was just like the devil, right? But it's ego. It's really, there are very good benefits to the ego, but it's about leaning into that darkness of the ego, and seeing the good enlightenment pieces to it. But ego, for a lot of people, is the probably one of the biggest catalyst drivers to why being alone is tough for them, why leaving something that's unhealthy is them. They think it's sometimes even the emotional connection or whatever it is to that external thing, but a lot of times it's their own individual ego to say, to hold on to something for so long. Like you see it for athletes that were fortunate enough to play mass amounts, like for a long period of time in their career, and go all the way to the point of like the end of a typical career. Maybe it's they're 40 years old, and but those last waning years, and you see in so many athletes where obviously there's a level of peak performance in the middle of their career that's just exponential, but then when they get those last few years, it's almost like they're just holding on to dear life and to like holding on to that existence of who they were or who they are there, and because they don't want to leave that. And it is very ego driven, and that right there is, again, goes right back to the triggers, because that's where you need to step inside and look at yourself and say, why am I doing this? Look at ourselves in the mirror and just say, what is it about me that's holding on to this and won't allow this to let go? And the ego will always kill you at the end of the day. It just goes to anything, and when your ego gets in the way, it'll slap you in the face harder than you can ever possibly imagine. The gym that I work out at in Austin, Texas, has this sign that says, leave your ego at the door. And it's really just about truly just saying, you know what, you're no better than anybody else. We're all in this thing together. And because it will beat you down if you allow yourself to come into the situation too high on anything, or to not be fully present in the moment. And it's, again, has good benefits, but also the ego is probably one of the biggest drivers for a former or an athlete that's on that verge, or even stepping, actually, after, as you mentioned before, as they step out and still holding on to that. It's like living in the glory days. It's so ego driven, because it's like, but that was then, what are you doing right now? So
I come across athletes previously where they would tell themselves through their expression of their identity, they would kind of talk about themselves in a way just to try and prove to themselves that they were that certain person. But you knew deep down that they were struggling with mental health, they were struggling with different factors, but they seen more extrinsic rewards to be more relevant in their life. And that transition of actually realizing that, it's not all about money, it's not all about fame, can actually really impact someone's personality, because all they've seen over over their duration of their career is, how much money can I earn? How much fame can I achieve? What's my popularity like? Where they're all at kind of extrinsic rewards, but they don't really necessarily give any inner fulfillment. Have you ever kind of come across anything around that, of people actually trying to shift their mindset of, well, it's more about what you think within, rather than the metrics and the other factors that are, especially in Western society, that are open to us? Have you ever come across anything within your practice, of having to change that outlook towards life?
all the time, that's part of what I'm creating with Athletes Afterlife is truly, again, I mentioned a little bit about it. It's about community, but a lot of it is about understanding, finding joy in the journey. And the reason why I have that kind of coined like phrase is that the word joy is actually in the word journey. And the problem is that joy is something that's deep seated, and you got to have that deeply internalized in you. So much of what we do, as you mentioned, and so much what of our society, especially in Western culture, is we lean so heavily on the external elements, on the materialistic things, on things that do involve money and possessions. And it's, at the end of the day, where it's like money can't buy happiness. It can buy happiness, but it doesn't buy joy. Happiness, we get happiness in external things. It's like going out, with our friends at night and drinking and having a good time. It's, if you're not in a place of joy, that moment is going to be fleeting. It's going to be that high dopamine hit, and then you're going to come crashing down. The next day, you're going to have anxiety. You're going to be feeling stressed. You're going to be feeling uneasy, partially probably due to the hangover, but also partially due to the fact that you're back alone with yourself and you don't have joy in here. So then what do? You go back out the next day and you have brunch with everybody. And then, or like you're going out and you're buying that new car and you think that that's living an abundant lifestyle. It's all materialistic. It's all something that is external from inside of you. If you're not completely content within with your own heart and your own soul, that everything, you can have all the money in the world. And I mean, there was a gentleman, recently, you hear about it all the time, where people commit suicide, and you think that their life is just full of they have the best life ever. They've got money, they've got a beautiful wife, they've got kids, they've got a great house, they've got the cars, they've got, the notoriety, they've got the publicity, and all of a sudden something happens and they kill themselves. It's money can buy moments of happiness, but it's never going to be long term. What has to happen is when you finally go deep inside yourself and find joy and peace within yourself, to where you don't need any of those things. You have enough money to take care of the other things and live what you quote unquote feel is financially free. And you can get to that point. At that point, it's like, what do you do with your time? What do you do with your life? How do you make an impact on yourself so you can make an impact on the world? And that's where I really work with people a lot, on trying to find that internal joy. And I had to do the work myself, because I went through periods of my life where I didn't have that, like where I was in a very dark place. And I had to dive deep to find that, because I kept buying things and spending money just exponentially and just burning through like almost everything I had, because I wasn't content with who I was. So now that I've gone through that journey, that's part of me. Part of my thing is helping others get through to the other side, to be very content and feel joy inside, so they enjoy the journey. And it's not just this arduous, hard work, materialistic process, all revolving around money, because all money is currency. It's basically, it's an energy, it's flow. So money is just, it is a physical representation of things, but it's just a byproduct of what you actually do and who you are. And after a certain amount, your level of happiness or level of joy doesn't exceed any more than what after a certain amount. I forgot what it is. Somebody said it was like 75,000. I feel like that's like an old stat, but even still, like at a certain level, you really don't have any additional joy outside of that. So you got to find it inside yourself, so that everything else continues to flow around you.
What about if someone's personality is all about money, wealth, and attention around that? How do you shift the mindset? Can you tell someone that because it's their personality, and you could come across as jealous or that they might be offended by that comment? I'm intrigued to kind of think about the layering process of kind of dissecting, breaking that down in terms of supporting someone and get them to be a little bit more self-aware of that process. Is there anything is there a strategy to that, or is that something that they have to maybe figure out themselves? I'm just intrigued.
Yeah, it's I mean, inevitably you're always going to offend someone who is very materialistic and driven around money and fame. And whenever they're around that, you can say whatever you want to them, but until they can actually break the cycle of who they actually are. And that's where it's hard to do it in a conscious level for people, because it's our subconscious is where we really need to kind of tap into. And that's why, going back to like the breath work, why that's so important, why going into those pieces of ourself because breath work actually taps more into the subconscious and slows things down. Same with meditation. Meditation does the same thing. And it's really helps you uncover things where all of a sudden you're like, wow, like, and that's the problem is, and I would say more so not for me, like telling somebody specific things. I'll go through a series of questions and ask them certain things. Sometimes it's just like really redundant questioning to get them to uncover why they are the way they are and why they do what they do, and why there's such a gravitational pull for them to be surrounded by money all the time and fame and looking for that next best thing and living this life of what everybody in social media perceives to be like phenomenal. And yet really like on a soul level, they're down here, and trying to help them uncover that. Because anytime I see someone very combative about that, because they or they defend it to no end, I'm like, you shouldn't have to defend. It's like explaining something. You shouldn't have to explain why you are the way you are, what you do, or what you want is what you want. Just let it be. Just say, this is what I want, this is who I am, and I don't need to explain myself, and I'm okay with that. But if they're defending it, it's tough. But that's why, like, I'll go into things like guided meditations and breath works, because that starts to tap into the subconscious and eliminates their conscious level. It drops that down to where the subconscious takes center stage, and they can actually start to understand themselves at a deeper level, and they'll uncover things about themselves that they didn't know. And it's going to be tough for them because they're going to have to integrate it after that. But that's where somebody who is very ego driven in that realm, some of the better practices that I can utilize to help them uncover those things and try to eliminate that type of mindset.
Are you familiar with the Diderot effects? Have you ever come across that kind of theory or that
No,
work?
actually,
No.
no.
Um,
Tell me
it's a
more
group.
about that.
It's a group of people in a obviously in the United States. They're called the minimalists. I don't know if you've come across them.
Yes,
They
yeah.
believe in minimalism, but they highlight this Diderot effect, which comes from a French artist who highlights that when we buy items, we feel pleasure for a certain period of time, and then that's kind of watered down, and we want more and we want more. And the minimalists relate it to consumerism and Western society, and how we try and buy items, or we're surrounded by advertisements and everything to kind of bring fulfillment. And does it necessarily give us, like you said, joy? And again, it's just intriguing what you said then and how that kind of correlates to that. I don't know
Yeah.
if you've checked that out. Maybe it's something to check out.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with minimalism, and
Mm,
but not that affect the Diderot
yeah.
things. But yeah, it's very true. It's never enough, you know. And comparison is, at the end of the day, is thief of joy, and that's, we live in a comparison society, and that's what social media does. It not only has a dopamine effect, but also has a very negative effect on people, because it's just the scrolling numbness. And I mean, I've done it before. I do it sometimes just to like zone out and just, but it's, I know why I do it intentionally, and I think that's the key. But yeah, if you're always comparing yourself, and you're always searching for the next thing, the next item, the next this, the next that, you're just, you're trying to bury something that you haven't addressed in your life. And yeah, and that's, I'm not saying people need to just live extremely minimalist. You know, everybody has their levels. I tell people, just take account for what you have in your life, the all the things that you have. Like, look around your house, look around your garage. Like, people that have built a life of 10, 15, 20 years in the same house or with the same person, like, you don't realize how much shit you accumulate over the course of time, and like, doesn't really
Yeah.
mean anything. You know, I mean, after I went through my second divorce, I had a whole storage full of shit that I wasn't using. And I went and I lived very minimalistic for about 5 months. And when I came back, I pretty much sold everything that I had, because I was like, I was like, I didn't even need any of this for 5 months. I thought I needed it when I was living with it, but I'm like, I don't really even need it. So just imagining, like, seeing what life looks like, and what it does is it frees up your ability to actually live a freer life. And I mean, for some people, they really find joy in having things, nice things. And I think you should always have nice things, but just take account of the things you haven't used in a while. Go through your closet, look at clothes that you haven't worn forever. I do a thing like where, if I haven't, you know, I'll go through my closet once every like 3 or 4 months, and I'll hold up 2 items of clothing. And if they don't speak to me immediately, I'll throw them to the side. And I just say, I'm donating this because I'm not wearing it anymore. So I think it's just things like that, to where, to being, tapping into the awareness of that, and understanding, like, yeah, this is it's a concept that we need to lean more into, and understanding like what we really need and what we don't need in our life.
You said comparison. I think that's a key catalyst term in your kind of answer then. Comparisons everywhere, whether that's in sport, whether that's in business, whether that's in other fields within society. How can we shift the mindset to stop comparing and making ourselves feel crap because we are comparing ourselves to the next person, or maybe looking down on other people because we seem to be more significant and superior? I think there's two sides of the coins there in terms of comparison. Um,
Mhm.
how do we shift the mindset to not compare? I'm a big believer of the only person you should compete against is yourself, and I think it's hard to, I think, I don't know if it's because society's wired us to think in a competitive manner because of capitalism and everything that aligns with our country and Western society, etc. But how do we develop ideas to not compare and really believe that saying around maybe just compete against yourself rather than others? I'm intrigued to hear what your practices might look like within that.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, because that was the first thing. Is you got to stop comparing, because the only person you should compare yourself to is who you were yesterday. I mean, hell, who you were even 5, 10, 15 minutes ago. If you didn't respond in a way that you needed to respond, or you shouldn't have responded, recognize that and then say, how can I respond to that better? Journal about it, write it down, and start really kind of diving into that, because the more that we can focus only internally, and it's not about always bettering ourselves, it's like in trying to beat who we were before. It's just about being content and at peace with who we are, and knowing that my process is my process, my journey is my journey. I can't compare somebody else's level 8 to my level 3. And I think we get so stuck on that because we're like, I need to get to there. And then when we get to there, it's like, there's always going to be someone that's better. There's always going to be someone with more money. There's always going to be somebody with more things. And we just have to say, are the wants that I want, are they because of something else I'm seeing, or is it something that I truly, really want for my life? And it goes back to understanding wants versus needs, but and really understanding, like, the wants are things that we strive for. There are going to be certain pieces of the puzzle that are going to really kind of make our life, transform. But if we get to the point where our wants, and we have to start validating why we want them, they become a need. And at that point, that need now becomes something outside of you. When it becomes something outside of you, now you're competing or comparing. And that's not a healthy thing at that point. It's and I would say for anybody that, especially as former athletes, they, you live in a state of competition. That's what's about. But you should still focus all of your work and say, I'm competing against who I was yesterday. I'm competing. Yeah, I'm in a team atmosphere and we're competing against this team. But if I've done what I'm supposed to do, and I've put my best foot forward every day, and I've done the work, and I'm working and energetically in a flow state, I will perform the way I need to. And if we don't win as a team, or if I don't win today, I can reflect back and say, what can I do to better myself the next time, so that I put either A, myself, or B, the team, in a position to win and do better the next time. And from just a separation of things that we could possibly do to eliminate that comparison and that constant look at things, is start to look at what you do in your life, or what you have environmentally. Going back to the environment, what is it in your life that's causing you to see comparison? What's in your life that is causing you to feel like you always have to compete? Social media being one. Start to curate your social media to where you only have, because you can click on someone's Instagram page and click the bell as far as like notifying you when you want to see, like, whenever they post something new. If it's somebody, focus those types of things and say, I'm only going to get notified by people that I'm inspired by, and people that lift me up, things like that. Or something I've started doing, oh God, I want to say 8-10 years ago now, when I really got into my personal development journey, was I don't watch the news at all. Like, I never watch it. I don't watch TV. It's just like a time suck. I will go on Netflix and watch a documentary about planet Earth or something like that, because it's inspiring to me. But as far as watching TV, watching the news is just it's a suck into negativity, and that's all that it is. And and same thing with politics. I don't really get heavy into politics, because it's all agenda driven. It's all trying to get you into, like, become working for the matrix and for the man, and following you down a path. It's really starting to look at your environment and saying, what do I have in my life right now that's causing me to compete, causing me to compare? It's one of the biggest reasons why in leadership, and I still guide people in leadership, former athletes, I still guide them in learning to be better leaders outside of sports. It's one of the reasons why so many companies struggle, because it's all about comparison and competing. And it's never this healthy environment and energy of just working with someone's internal strengths and abilities and helping them just compete against themselves on a daily basis. It's always numbers and metrics driven, and it's never enough. It's never enough. And it's, you're always, what that does to an individual slowly taps away at their joy and their happiness. And before you know it, you're working with a company for 15, 16 years, and you just are so sapped of energy, and all you do is you're just go into a depressive state, and you start creating more and more bad habits. So yeah, it's really all around that kind of stuff, and just looking at what you can do to eliminate those types of things, and then just looking at yourself every day and saying, what 3 things can I do to better myself today? And just gradually, there's a rule of 1% better. If you focus on 1% better every single day, it'll be 37 times greater than you were a year from then. So like, if you just start today and say, I'm going to get 1% better, and what does that 1% look like? It's different for everybody, but just focusing on the 1% and looking at the long game, and not the short, dopamine hit gradual effect, or short dopamine hit, and just looking at the gradual effect and impact, and over time, the compounding effect, you'll be so much further along in your journey than most people ever will.
So what I tend to get my guests to do is look forward or look back on their career. So obviously working with soccer players and other athletes, I get them to kind of reminisce on their career back and look at what they might change. With you, Jeff, I'm going to get you to look forward, because I think it's a growing area, and an area that you have got big ambitions for. You mentioned your book moments ago. So where do you see yourself within this area in the future? What would your legacy be, and what would you like to kind of be remembered in the future around identity, athlete support, player care, in terms of your practice? What is your fulfilling game in the future?
Just you asking that question just kind of gave me some goosebumps, just because I just, all I have ever wanted to do my whole life was impact people on a greater level. To know that on my deathbed, and if people, when they think back about me and what I did, they will say that I was a better person having met Jeff. And for me, it's in relation to working with former athletes and athletes afterlife. I see myself speaking on stages. I see myself speaking at large events, and also, going and helping individual teams and just individuals in general, creating a massive community. It's something that we're working on right now that I've got in the works. Hasn't come to fruition yet, but a community where all former athletes of any sport, any sex, any race, it doesn't matter who, doesn't matter what level they reached, they can be a part of this community to create something to where they start meeting other people and start understanding that they're all interconnected. We're all one. We're all the same. We are the one. We are the source. We are everything. And I just want I want to leave this world and want people to remember me by creating this legacy that they realized that deep down inside, they had everything, all the answers within them. Everything that they ever needed was there. And that's what created them to become an athlete. And that's we're going to do at Athletes Afterlife, is to help create their life after sports to be so much exponentially better than what it was when they were in sport. They see that as just a part of their journey. And now that their journey is going to continue to be not just that much better for themselves personally and professionally, but for their family, for their community, and everything that they do to impact everybody around them. And that's what we're going to do, is create this ripple effect of community and just impacting the world around us.
Jeff, where can people find you? Instagram, social media, website? Just give a bit of an elaboration on those, and where people can contact you if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my website. It's athletesafterlife.com. If people want to email me, if they want specific information, contact me directly, they can email me to info@athletesafterlife.com. And as far as social channels, I obviously have my podcast that's on Spotify and Apple. It's just Athletes Afterlife with Jeff Murray. And then on top of that, Instagram, social media, Instagram, it's athletes.afterlife. Facebook's same, just athletes afterlife. And then if it's someone who focuses more on the business side of things, and it's a business person that is a former athlete, they can find me just Jeff Murray on LinkedIn. So those are the main avenues that people can touch base with me.
What we'll do, Jeff, just to kind of help people find you, is we'll put your links all in the description. So all your kind of links to your social media and your webpage and etc. We'll put that in the description. I just want to thank you, Jeff. I've really enjoyed talking to you today. I think you're very inspirational, and good luck with your practice. And hopefully we can stay connected on those platforms.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christie.
But thank you for your time, Jeff.
Thank you so much. I'm super grateful for you, man.
Thank you, mate.